The atmosphere in St. Cecilia's Cathedral was designed to be transcendent. Filtered winter light, stained with the jewel tones of ancient glass, painted the high stone floors in patches of deliberate beauty. It was a perfect, hushed stage, set for Veronica's grand entrance, the triumphant closing of one chapter and the joyful beginning of the next. She moved down the aisle with an air of sophisticated grace, a breathtaking vision in ivory silk, every fold of lace whispering a promise of peace. This peace was not inherited, it was forged. Veronica had spent 3 long years constructing it, meticulously rebuilding her world over the ruins of a sudden, brutal abandonment. She ignored the soft click of cameras, focusing instead on Marcus, her groom, who waited by the altar, his face open, honest, and filled with uncomplicated love. Marcus was her certainty. She reached the third pew, her heart a quiet, steady drum of happiness. And then the music stuttered. Not the glorious organ, that played on, oblivious. It was the internal rhythm of her carefully calibrated life that violently seized up. Her focus instantly dissolved, the vibrant colors of the light draining away until the world was reduced to high-contrast black and white, the edges of reality sharpened to a painful point. She stopped. Her gaze didn't lift to the altar as it should have. It snagged, instead, on the back row, tucked into the thick, protective shadows. A man was standing there. He was utterly wrong for the setting, not in a pressed tuxedo, but in a worn, dark leather jacket that seemed to absorb the light. His posture was too still, his face leaner, etched with shadows that spoke of a hard life lived elsewhere. But those eyes? Devastatingly familiar, sea green and carrying a history of shared breaths and broken promises, were unmistakable. It was Leo. He was the ghost, the charming, reckless, magnetic chaos who had vanished 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days ago, leaving behind nothing but silence and a single echoing void. And now he had materialized on the one day Veronica needed her past to stay buried. The weight of unspoken history. Veronica forced her feet to move again, the train of her gown sounding like a distant, nervous sigh on the marble. Her father's reassuring squeeze on her arm was a sensation she barely registered. Her entire being was focused on the phantom in the back row. He actually came. The thought was a shard of ice, instantly chilling the hard-won joy in her blood. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of everything he was, the roaring, consuming fire of their past, the promises they had made in whispers on rainy nights, the sudden, total void he had left, the endless, agonizing silence that followed. He hadn't just ended a relationship, he had performed an erasure. As she finally reached the altar, Marcus took her hand. His skin was warm, his grip steady and confident, the physical manifestation of the stable, deep river of love she had built her life upon. He sensed the minute tremor in her fingers, the sudden rigidity, and misinterpreted it kindly as overwhelming emotion. "It's okay, V," he mouthed, his eyes radiating a genuine, protective concern. "We're here." Veronica tried to anchor herself to his presence, to the safe harbor of his touch, but the pull from the deep end of the church was too strong. She was standing at the threshold of her future, but her gaze was constantly dragged back to her past. Her maid of honor, Tasha, was her first line of defense. Tasha, who had held Veronica through the worst of the silence, was now standing sentinel. As Veronica took her place, Tasha subtly shifted. Her eyes, the eyes of a fiercely loyal and highly opinionated friend, snapped to the back corner. Tasha didn't have to ask. The sight of the leather jacket and the sea green gaze was confirmation enough. "I swear to God, Veronica," Tasha's eyes screamed, the intensity threatening to crack the placid surface of her perfect makeup. The audacity, the sheer theatrical audacity. Veronica maintained a glacial stillness, offering a slight, desperate plea with her own eyes. Don't do anything. Tasha's expression hardened into a weapon. Her posture shifted from elegant friend to emotional bodyguard, ready to deploy. I'm calling an audible. I'm thinking a sudden allergic reaction that involves aggressively throwing my bouquet at his head. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice a pleasant, measured drone of commitment and shared paths. Marcus's hand was a fortress around hers, yet the tension was now a physical, humming wire running straight from Leo to Veronica. Leo still wasn't moving. He was simply observing. His presence wasn't an interruption, but an accusatory surveillance, silently challenging the entire scene. You moved on, his stillness seemed to broadcast, but you didn't erase me. The organ music swelled, announcing the central moment, the exchange of vows. Marcus turned to her, his face alight with honest feeling, ready to speak his heart. Veronica knew his vows would be a testament to reliable, unconditional love, a perfect antithesis to Leo's sudden abandonment. But she couldn't focus. She could only feel the chilling, heavy weight of Leo's relentless gaze. She knew the sequence of the ceremony, the inevitable question that was coming, and as the officiant's voice prepared to launch into the powerful query, "Do you, Marcus, take this woman, Veronica?" Veronica stared into the dark corner. Leo moved, not to leave, not to speak. He shifted his weight ever so slightly, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto hers with a desperate, terrible intensity. He was waiting for the moment. He was staying for the objection.
Chapter 2. The Altar and the Antithesis. The air in the cathedral was thick and silent, save for the low rhythmic hum of the organ and the officiant's gentle cadence. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus turned to Veronica, his love an uncomplicated blinding force, and began to speak his vows. "Veronica," Marcus began, his voice clear and steady, a calming anchor in the mounting chaos. "I promise you shelter, not from the storm, but in it. I promise you certainty, because I have seen the strength it took for you to build the life you deserved, and I promise you every tomorrow, without question, without pause, without fear of silence." His words were not just vows. They were a deliberate, loving antithesis to every terrible thing Leo had done. Certainty, without pause, without fear of silence. Veronica felt a painful surge of emotion, gratitude, relief, and a desperate, bitter regret that she hadn't found this man sooner. Marcus was everything she needed. He was the repair, the healing. From her peripheral vision, she saw Leo flinch, a minuscule involuntary movement in the shadows. Marcus's stability, her repair, was Leo's accusation. He wasn't watching a wedding, he was watching the proof of his ultimate, irreversible failure. It was Veronica's turn. She swallowed, the silk of her collar suddenly too tight. She turned to Marcus, determined to lock her eyes on his kind face, to push the ghost into the oblivion where he belonged. "Marcus," she started, but her voice caught, thin and reedy. The vision of Leo in the back row, his eyes dark with what looked dangerously close to pain, was a physical distraction. "He's hurting?" she thought, the sheer hypocrisy sparking a furious heat inside her. "He doesn't get to hurt. He forfeited that right when he chose the silence." She forced herself to speak, pushing the words past the lump in her throat. "I promise to give you my whole self, every day, to trust in the shelter you provide, and to always, always know that you are real, and you are here." The last phrase was spoken with a devastating emphasis, aimed directly at the dark corner where Leo stood sentinel. Leo felt the polished words of the groom, the stark, intentional language of the bride hit him like physical blows. He hadn't come to stop the wedding. He had come because the thought of her, his Veronica, his V, standing there sealing a life without him, had become a physical agony he could no longer endure from afar. He needed one last look at the life he had thrown away. His disappearance hadn't been simple cruelty. It had been an act of desperate, terrified self-preservation, a financial crisis that turned instantly catastrophic, a mistake that had placed him in danger, making him believe in a blinding panic that the only way to save her was to vanish, to make himself unfindable, to sever the link so she wouldn't be collateral damage. He had broken her heart to save her life, a desperate calculation of a broken man. But standing here, watching her radiant, elegant, and happy, he saw the flaw in his logic. He hadn't saved her, he had scarred her. And the man standing next to her, the solid, kind, reliable Marcus, was the living testament to the stability he had stolen from her. The sight of Veronica's trembling hand, the one she immediately hid in Marcus's, was a crushing weight. He hadn't just lost his future, he had nearly destroyed hers. Leo's body was shaking, a silent internal tremor that contrasted sharply with the church's solemn stillness. He was a man drowning in dry clothes, tormented by a regret that was 3 years overdue. The ceremony moved into its final stage. The officiant, hands outstretched, reached the classic charged phrase. The entire church held its breath, an universal communal pause before the final commitment. And now, if anyone here present knows of any reason why these two persons should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. The silence was deafening. It stretched, heavy and profound, filled only by the distant, echoing sound of the organ music. Marcus and Veronica were locked in a gaze of mutual trust. Everyone else, including Tasha, who looked ready to spring into action, scanned the congregation, but all eyes, including Veronica's, were pulled to the back corner. Leo was moving. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He simply pushed off the wall, his leather jacket squeaking softly in the silence. Veronica's heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. Is this it? Is he going to ruin it? A wave of incandescent rage mixed with agonizing familiarity washed over her. He takes 3 steps forward, breaking the plane of the shadow. His face was clearly visible now, a devastating close-up of torment, his eyes wet with unshed tears. He looked beaten, not belligerent. Then he stopped. He was barely 6 feet from the last occupied pew, standing next to a small antique mahogany side table where the guest book sat. He stared straight at Veronica, a silent communication passing between them, a look of desperate, final surrender. He hadn't come to object. He had come to say goodbye. With a rapid, almost frantic movement, he reached inside his jacket. Veronica gasped, a tiny, sharp sound lost in the silence. Tasha took a tense, preparatory step forward. Leo pulled out a small, tarnished piece of silver. It was a necklace, a locket, the very locket he had shown her on that rainy night, the one that held the promise of their forever. He placed it carefully on the mahogany table, right next to the guest book, where it caught the light, an anachronistic, devastating symbol. And then Leo bolted. He didn't walk. He spun on his heel and disappeared through the oak doors, a fleeting shadow, the sound of his worn boots echoing once before being swallowed by the noise of the closing door. The ghost had returned, delivered his message, and vanished again. The door clicked shut, leaving behind the unbearable, profound silence. The silver locket glinting next to the guest book was the only proof he had ever been there. The officiant, composed and unflustered, calmly addressed the stunned silence. Then let us proceed.
Chapter 3. The Shadowed Victory. The ceremony concluded in a rush of bewildered relief. The officiant, a true professional, navigated the shockwave Leo had left behind with graceful speed. Marcus, sensing the congregation's disarray and Veronica's rigid tension, didn't hesitate. He sealed their commitment with a triumphant, possessive kiss. It was a beautiful moment, but it was profoundly shadowed. Veronica kissed him back, tasting the metallic fear and the fierce devotion in the embrace. They were married, but the ghost had left an object lesson behind.
As the triumphant recessional music began, Tasha was already moving. Forget throwing the bouquet. She moved with the stealth and purpose of a special ops agent. She ignored the confused murmurs of the guests and veered sharply toward the back row. "Do not touch that, V," Tasha hissed under her breath as she passed Veronica, her eyes blazing. "Don't look at it. We'll handle the explosive ordnance later." But it was too late. The glint of tarnished silver next to the sprawling guest book was a beacon only Veronica could see. As she walked, smiling mechanically on Marcus's arm, her eyes were glued to the little object Leo had chosen to leave behind. It wasn't just a locket. It was a physical artifact of their broken, passionate history, the very symbol of the forever he had promised on that rainy night. Once the receiving line was over and the couple was ushered into a small, ornate anteroom before the reception, Veronica's composure finally fractured. "The locket," she said, her voice thin, her hands trembling as she pulled off her delicate gloves. "Tasha, where is it?" Tasha sighed, pulling the silver chain from the deep pocket she had stuffed it into. "I should have thrown it into the baptismal font," she muttered, holding the tarnished silver up. "It feels like it's vibrating with bad decisions. Don't look, V. It's an empty gesture from a walking disaster." The locket felt heavy and cold in Veronica's palm. It felt like holding a frozen piece of the past. 3 years of anger, confusion, and grief rushed back, momentarily eclipsing the joy of the last hour. "It's not just an empty gesture," Veronica whispered, her eyes dark. "It's his way. The theatrical, desperate way he always handled his inevitable catastrophes." She felt an overwhelming, furious need for closure. He had taken her peace. He was not going to take her future. She had to know what was inside, one last time. She pressed her thumb against the ancient clasp. It clicked open easily. It was empty. Veronica's shoulders slumped. "Of course," she said, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her. "The perfect symbol. 3 years of emptiness." "See," Tasha said, gently touching her arm. "It's rubbish. Drop it. Let's go get drunk and celebrate the non-ghost who was waiting for you." But as Tasha turned to leave, Veronica saw it. Tucked impossibly deep inside the velvet lining of the locket, so thin it was almost invisible, was a minuscule, folded slip of paper. She plucked it out with the tip of her perfectly manicured nail. She unfolded the note. The handwriting, Leo's familiar, sprawling, impulsive script, made her stomach clench. The message wasn't a love confession, an apology, or a final plea. It was just 5 words, written quickly, definitively, and devastatingly. "I needed you safe, not ruined with me." The cryptic, terrible humanity of it shattered her anger. It wasn't the heroic, romantic reason she might have wanted, but it explained the total silence. He left her because he thought his chaos was ruinous, and he couldn't bear to drag her down with him. It was a selfish, catastrophic act of warped selflessness. It didn't excuse the betrayal, but it finally, devastatingly ended the mystery. The ghost had finally explained his haunting. Before Veronica could process the complex agony of those 5 words, the door opened. Marcus stood there, his tuxedo perfect, his eyes concerned. He didn't ask about the locket or about the drama in the back row. He only asked about her. "Hey," he said softly, walking over and taking her hands. "Are you okay? You look like you've just fought a dragon and won, but you're still bleeding." Veronica let out a ragged breath. "I'm fine, Marcus. I just finally laid something to rest." He looked down at the locket in her palm, his expression one of perfect, trusting understanding. He saw the artifact of her pain, and he did not feel jealousy. He felt only compassion. "Good," he said, his steady gaze meeting hers. "Then let's start our life, shall we? You don't have to tell me the story now, or ever. Just know this. Whatever ruin he carried, it stops here. You are safe now. You are mine." His words, simple and grounded, were the final, necessary antidote to Leo's dramatic chaos. He didn't offer a flash flood of passion. He offered a shelter that would last forever. Veronica looked at the locket, then at Marcus. She had carried the ruin of the past for so long. She wouldn't carry it into her future. She walked across the room to a heavy stone flower planter nestled near the window, a quiet, symbolic piece of immovable stability. With a deep breath, she gently placed the tarnished silver locket, the symbol of Leo, and the ruin you thought he saved her from, into the cool soil, tucking it under the earth. She didn't bury the memory, but she contained the object, leaving the past in a firm, permanent place. She turned back to Marcus, the sun catching the diamond on her left hand, the real promise, the real forever. "Let's go," she said, her voice clear, her true smile finally lighting up her face. "I have a husband waiting for me."
They walked out of the anteroom and into the cheers of the reception, the sound of the wedding band swelling into a joyful, vibrant noise. The cinematic focus narrowed, Veronica, radiant in Marcus's arms, swaying to the music. The ghost had finally delivered his last message, but the bride had already written her own happy ending.